So we are continuing our theme for December, which is Many Faiths, One Family, celebrating the holy days together. There are many holy days that happen this month. Last week we talked about Rahatsu, the Buddhist celebration of the day that Buddha became enlightened under the Bodhi tree. A celebration that also calls us to go within, looking at our shadow, looking at ourself and the parts to ourself, releasing what no longer serves and preparing for a new year. Beautiful tradition. Today I want to talk about winter solstice, and then coming up will be Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. So, I feel this time of year is magical. Anybody else feel that way? Now, I want to acknowledge up front that it's not that way for all of us every year. You know, sometimes we're mourning the loss of someone that passed at this time of year or during this year, and there's a disorder, psychological disorder called SAD, seasonal affective disorder. So I just want to acknowledge that not everybody is in this jolly mood, and that's okay, and we honor and are compassionate with everyone no matter where they are. But there is something magical in the air. And it's not just Christmas if you were raised Christian, or Hanukkah if you were raised in the Jewish faith, which is celebrating the Festival of Lights. It is ancient because it has to do with astronomy. It has to do with our position in the solar system relative to the sun. And people years and centuries and eons ago, I mean, we're talking 5,000-6,000 years ago, we have records of people celebrating the winter solstice. So it's interesting to note that the winter solstice marks the return of the sun back into an closer, well, it doesn't have to do with distance. We're actually closer to the sun this time of year. Do you know that? Than during the summer. We're actually closer. And our speed is faster because we're closer. I think it's 18.5 miles, I think it is, a second that we're traveling around the sun on average, faster this time of year, which is kind of interesting because seasonally it's a time of year where we're slowing down. But this winter solstice, the ancients used to think the sun actually died, because for 3 days it seemed to stand still. The day before the solstice, the day of the solstice, and then the day after, when it began its trajectory back north for those of us in the northern hemisphere. That is the winter solstice. Obviously, for those in the southern hemisphere, this is the summer solstice. But they thought that the sun died and then was reborn out of the womb of the dark, the goddess, nature, which is beautiful. So this theme of birth this time of year is ancient. The Persians celebrated the god Mithra, who was understood to be born on the winter solstice and was the god of light, out of the dark. It's so interesting that, and we know, scholars tell us, that even Jesus was not truly born this time of year. Probably he was born in the spring. But the early church leaders realized that it was wise to capitalize on the pagan traditions that already existed and to celebrate the birth of the sun, S-O-N, at the same time the pagans were used to celebrating the birth of the sun, S-U-N. So I don't know, there's something about this idea that this is an ancient tradition that moves me. We know that monuments like Stonehenge and Machu Picchu were built recognizing the alignment of the sun. I visited a year and a half ago, 2 summers ago, the stone circles in Ireland, which go back 5,000 years, and passage tombs where people were buried and then thought to go into the next world through this passage tomb. And some of those were built so that the entryway to one of the ones we visited, and I get confused in the names, the entryway was built so that it aligned with the solstice. Some of them summer solstices, some of them winter, at sunrise. It's just phenomenal that they were even able to do that. Some of the stones in one of those things was 40 tons. I don't know how people in those days even moved stones that heavy. And if you think about it, in ancient times, the winter was kind of a scary time in some ways. Food was scarce. They didn't have enough daylight to do the activities that they normally needed to do. Do you know that in Oregon, in the summer, we have 15 hours of daylight in the summer, 9 hours of daylight in the winter? Wow. It's really different. And yet this time of year is when we celebrate the light. I guess because it's that hopefulness that, even though the days are at their longest right now, by the way, the sunsets and sunrises don't correspond with winter solstice. This is interesting because clock time is a little different from solar time. So for example, the latest sunrise doesn't occur till early January. And the latest sunset already happened. So it's interesting. Yeah. But the lights, I don't know about you, but I love to decorate. Anybody who's been to my home recently will attest to that. I love to decorate with lights because it is so dark. And let's face it, at 4 in the afternoon, it's dark, right? So I love lights. I love candlelight. I love electric light. Think about the Hanukkah. We light the menorah, 8 days of Hanukkah, and that wonderful celebration that we'll talk about more next week. It's also a time of year, well, the song goes, it's that, I won't sing it, I'll say it. I'll spare you. Mandy, maybe, or Alexa, it's that time of year when the world falls in love, right? Can you sing it? It's that time of year when the world falls in love. Okay. That time. I've learned to turn my mic off when we're singing. But I love that idea, and yet it is that time of year, I think, when we feel that way. A lot of us are tuned in to connecting with neighbors and family and friends that we don't see the rest of the year, sending cards, taking baked goods, right? Thinking about people who are less fortunate and delivering food. And it's a wonderful tradition. But I would say it's not the time of year when the world falls in love, right? We are in love. We are born in love, from love, made of it, here to express it, right? But thankfully, it's a time of year when we're called to be more aware of that for some reason, which is wonderful. And I want to show you a cute little thing that Tammy Hoke gave me as a gift. Laura's going to come up and help me demonstrate this. This is something that helps us know our connection one with the other. So watch what happens. Watch what happens when we complete the circuit. Thank you, Laura. We are all connected, not just at Christmas time or Hanukkah time or winter solstice time. We are all connected. But I think it is a time of year that calls us to certain practices as the ancients were called. Last week we talked about Rahatsu and this practice of going within. Nature kind of calls us within, doesn't it? The leaves are falling off the trees. We're called to look at what we might release. The bears are hibernating. We're called to maybe take some time out, take a breath, pause. Sometimes this time of year is the last thing we do. We're so busy. I've heard that a lot from people lately. I'm tired out, and I think we really do need to take time to rest, to rejuvenate, to look within. So I think this is calling us to a deeper walk with our own spiritual practices. For myself, I started a practice which I had taken up long ago. Some of you know Julia Cameron's work. She wrote a book called The Artist's Way. And in that, she suggests a spiritual practice called the morning pages. What you do is early in the morning when you first get up, you write 3 pages in your journal, stream of consciousness, whatever comes to mind. It's a wonderful practice. I did it on Saturday morning when I was preparing for our gathering of practitioners at our home, and we were busy with a lot of things to do, to cook and finish the decorating and all that. But I took the time, and it was so sweet because what I realized was in this very, very busy week, there were so many things to be grateful for that I'd forgotten about. And it's just a great time because it just brings up into your present consciousness whatever needs to come up. Morning pages, just one of many practices that we could take up this time of year, the winter solstice. So back to some of the old times. In Europe, this time of year was called Yule. There was a Norse tradition with a god named Jule, which means wheel, which is about the wheel of life and the cycle of the seasons. It's why they brought wheels, actually wagon wheels, into the home and decorated them with greens, evergreens. It's a wonderful time of year to bring color into the home. That's why I like the decorations. I hate taking them down, because it's colorful. People would get together to celebrate, to drink, to dance. And it is ironic again that at the very darkest time of the year, we're celebrating. And I would suggest darkness and loss We need that contrast in our lives, yes? When we have darkness, we appreciate the light. When we have loss, we appreciate the bounty. One of the little things I did this week preparing for this gathering yesterday, I have a little tin. I lost my kitty Indigo in the spring, who I'd had for 15 years, and she's in a tin, her ashes. And my housemate Vivian asked me where we could put them so that we could make room for the food, not next to the ashes. And I decided to put her under the Christmas tree, because every year she would love to sit under the Christmas tree. In fact, she sat in the middle of my village all the time, this big giant black kitty with my miniature village. And she used to play with, in my little wooden creche scene, she used to play with the wooden sheep. In fact, again this year, when I unpacked my Christmas stuff, the wooden sheep wasn't with the creche, it was somewhere else, because typically I don't find it till 3 weeks after Christmas when I'm cleaning. But the beauty of it is I know she's there with me. I feel like she's there with me in spirit. And I think it's a time of year when we can do that. I feel connected to my ancestors this time of year, my relatives that have passed. I think it's, I don't know, there's something about that connection that Laura and I demonstrated. I think there's a connection not only between those of us who are here, but those of us who are on the other side as well. Yeah. So this morning in my own time, my own quiet time. Okay, true confession first of all. I've spent time the last week being a little I shouldn't even say a little, being judgmental, being rather judgmental about someone I knew in the past who's posting all over Facebook. This person's going through a very difficult period in their life. And I don't post that kind of stuff on Facebook. I just kind of work through it. And she does. And I was judgmental about it. For many reasons and in many ways. And it finally dawned on me this morning as I'm meditating, let that go. I am not the judge and jury of the world. Just because I do things one way doesn't mean everybody else has. I didn't make up the rules, you know? I'm called to be compassionate. Clearly this person is hurting deeply, deeply. And so I let go and asked forgiveness. Not that I did anything, directly. But I got to tell you, I felt lighter. You know that feeling? Having let that go, I felt lighter and cleaner. And so again, it's that feeling of lightness. I think that's one of the things we're called to do this time of year. Take inventory. Do forgiveness, whether it's for yourself or others. I love that phrase, I forgive myself for judging myself as you fill in the blank, or I forgive this person. For I'm judging her as, she isn't necessarily the things I'm judging her for. She's having a hard time. Yeah. Then 2 scripture verses came to mind this morning. That was my upbringing, Christian. And you may be familiar with these, but they were very applicable. One of them is, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Sometimes it's translated as plank, or why do you see the speck that is in your brother's or sister's eye, but don't see the log in your own? That is a beautiful reminder when I'm trying to judge, or I'm tending to judge someone else, to look at where does that aspect or quality or practice live in me, and to just look at your shadow, like Buddha did under the Bodhi tree. It's a beautiful thing to do this time of year. The second verse that came to mind this morning was, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, first be reconciled to your brother, and then come offer your gift. Was watching a Christmas movie last night. I'm into schmaltzy Christmas movies. And it was partly about a man and son who had been estranged and holding, grudges against each other, and finally, during the Christmas season, came together and forgave each other. I think it's a good thing to do. And we can't always control what someone else is going to do, but we can control how we feel and the energy we send to somebody, be it judgmental and hostile or forgiving, compassionate and kind. So I was grateful for those 2 reminders for myself this morning, and I share them because, we all, anybody else in here have a tendency to be judgmental once in a while? I hope I'm not alone. Actually, it would be nice if I weren't alone, but if I was alone, yeah, it would. So a couple quotes for you. This one is unattributed, I believe. In a way, winter is the real spring, the time when the inner things happen, the resurgence of nature. As you prepare for winter solstice, you'll discover there's an immense need for slowing down, for silence and resting. Take the time to listen to those things that speak without words. Again, it's that balance. Yes, we're going to have parties, and yes, we're going to celebrate, I hope, but we're also, I hope, going to take that resting time. And this from Frederick Lenz. The winter solstice is the time of ending and beginning, a powerful time, a time to contemplate immortality, a time to forgive and to be forgiven and to make a fresh start, a time to awaken. So winter solstice happens this year on December 22nd. Another practice that many people do is to walk the labyrinth. And I know that there's one in Ashland. I know that there's one at Asante Hospital right here in Medford. And I encourage us to look up, there's a lot of celebrations around this time of year, to look up, to Google and to find, if you're so called, on that day, the 22nd, to do a ritual, a tradition. I just think it's so amazing to just even think about ourselves hurtling 18.5 miles per second through space, and our relationship to the sun. Like the ancients, to just become more attuned to nature and less involved with, the electronics and all the other kind of stuff we're doing. Again, I guess I mentioned for ancient humans, the first months of winter were often difficult, darker, colder, food was scarce. We use that phrase, being in the dark, as a negative thing, that we're in all manner of discomfort, of confusion, of ignorance, of not understanding, of being exposed to one's fears. But this time of year, we get to celebrate the triumph of light over the increasing darkness, which gave ancient people hope. So I think being in the dark can be a good thing. Don't tell that to a toddler when you try to turn out the nightlight, right? But I think it can be a good thing if we learn to use it to our benefit, if we learn to turn within. There's a beautiful poem by Robert Louis Stevenson that I wanted to share with you about winter. I happen to love winter. One of the reasons I moved to Oregon from Southern California, even though the weather in Southern California is awesome and draws everybody there, I like the seasons myself. Yes. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote this poem entitled Wintertime. Late lies the wintry sun abed. A frosty, fiery, sleepy head blinks but an hour or two, and then a blood-red orange sets again. Before the stars have left the skies, at morning in the dark I rise, and shivering in my nakedness by the cold candle bathe and dress. Close by the jolly fire I sit to warm my frozen bones a bit, or with a reindeer sled explore the colder countries round the door. When to go out, my nurse doth wrap me in my comforter and cap. He's a young man, writing as a young man. The cold wind, or rather a child, the cold wind burns my face and blows its frosty pepper up my nose. Feels like that, doesn't it? Black are my steps on silver sod, thick blows my frosty breath abroad, and tree and house and hill and lake are frosted like a wedding cake. Wedding cake, and I don't want to get too deep and esoteric here, but I loved that image because a wedding, I think it's a wedding in winter of the light and the dark. It's a new beginning as newlyweds celebrate a life together. It's a new life together with a new self if we take the time to shed what no longer serves us and recommit to what does serve us. Yes? It can be a wedding. It can be a celebration. Robert Louis Stevenson, lovely, lovely, lovely. A psalmist said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. The return of light reassures us. Sunlight allows us to see more clearly, with more detail, with more color. Light is primarily soothing, although I think dark can be too. Joy cometh in the morning. I think that's a beautiful reminder for those of us who are going through a difficult season, this holiday season, that those cycles happen, We have ups, we have downs, and we can learn to extract the good even from the difficult times. It's a good reminder. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, said, "It is in this moment of time that we are to make the great decision. It is in this day in which we are now living that we must choose what path we are to follow. Shall we live in fear or in faith? Shall we live in confusion or in the peace that comes from a deep and abiding conviction that there is a power greater than we are, ready, willing, and able to work for us?" A faith in that power. So in Science of Mind, we think of light as an aspect of the divine. And I think we're invited this season to think back to how we've been challenged, either earlier in our lives or perhaps this past year. It does feel like we're in the dark sometimes, confused and uncomfortable. But then something happens, either has happened or will happen, where we feel that light going on again. We feel lighter, we feel able to breathe. But the light usually goes on because we're willing to do our own inner work, not necessarily because outer circumstances have changed, but because we've done our own inner work. I was reminded this week that candles don't light themselves, right? We have to light them. We need each other to make the darkness bearable or perhaps even comforting. And when we can do that for one another, joy does come in the morning. And that's really what Sangha, spiritual community, is about, to doing that for one another. And I think doing that for the larger community as well. This time of year, Dhanama is putting us in touch with our seasons, Northwest Seasonal Workers Association, asking for our money and our gifts. There's information, and she'd be willing to talk. We share with our neighbors that are... I recently heard from another denomination, actually from one of my neighbors, that there's some kind of a program where you can donate here in Medford. I know Ashland has wonderful programs through Aura, and we have donated to them. Reverend Michelle Ariano being the executive director, options for the homeless in Ashland. But here in Medford, there's also a way we can every other month commit to delivering to this organization, and I don't know what they are yet. I'm going to find out from my neighbor this afternoon, a bag of food to be distributed. So it's that time of year when we're reminded to think about those that are in need and to share in a very, very small way. I had the thrill of doing that, the kind of good feeling of doing that, when my housemate Vivian came back from Thanksgiving in Southern California. She brought the better part of a pumpkin pie, homemade, delicious pumpkin pie. And I, with my sugar addiction, had a very small piece and thought, okay, I don't want this in the house. So we were going to throw it away. And I thought, I can't throw it away when there are other people in the world who don't have enough to eat. So I cut it in little individual-sized pieces, wrapped each piece on a paper plate, wrapped a fork, a disposable fork, and went out on my errands and just looked for homeless people. You can see them with their shopping carts. And it was so rewarding because I tried to do it in a humble way. You know, we had this homemade pumpkin pie and we have enough to share. I was thinking you might enjoy a piece, and it was like, yeah. And it just felt, oh, thank you, God, for the opportunity to recognize my own bounty and to not be wasteful, but to think of someone else. I had the opportunity to pass along some clothing also this past week that I was going to just give away, and the person was so grateful. So, you know, it is the season of giving, and that brings us joy as well. So winter solstice, a time to remember nature, like the leaves dropping to the ground, to look at what we might release, a time to go within, to develop a practice, whether it's morning pages or meditation or finding a place to celebrate the solstice with one another. To, yes, have times of light and celebration and color, but balancing that with times of inward reflection and reevaluation. Once again, Reverend Michelle Ariano will be leading a workshop on the year's end and setting new intentions the first Sunday in January, another beautiful time of reflection and resetting, and maybe having a wedding cake. Maybe we should have a wedding cake at that retreat, celebrating our new relationship to a new self and a new life. So I'm going to end with a blessing I found, which I love. My wishes for you and for our neighbors this time of year. If I can find both pieces of it. Deep peace of the winter solstice to you. Deep peace of the falling snow to you. Deep peace of the love of friends to you. Deep peace of the gentle deer to you. Deep peace of the moon and stars to you, my friends. Let's go into prayer. Thinking about that beautiful song our music team sang, "Do you hear what I hear? Do you see what I see?" I picture myself outside on a winter night looking at the stars and recognizing the vastness of this universe. There's something when I do that that calls me to recognize the presence of a creative power that I can't quite understand, the great mystery, the source of all that is, of me, of you, of the gentle deer, of the trees that know somehow to drop their leaves and then to bud and to blossom once again. This force of life that is behind all of nature and all of life elsewhere in the universe, which hopefully one day we will connect with. I somehow think that connecting tool works with all creation, aliens, what we call aliens, beings on other planets. This one life living itself as each of us everywhere, which is here surrounding us, breathing us, guiding us, supplying us. If we can just get quiet enough to hear that voice, do you hear it? What is it guiding us to do? Just as I was able finally to get quiet in the midst of my busy holiday preparations and was guided this morning. That is available to each of us always, always, always. So I'm blessing each of us, affirming for each of us this holy days season, to be aware of our own needs, to be aware of the needs of our neighbor, to be aware of what a joy it is to give from our excess, and what a joy it is to receive graciously as well, whether it be from God, whether it be from friends, neighbors. I was blessed this week when we lost a tree and had to have it cut down because it was leaning after the storm, and grieving that, lost a chimney cap in the wind. And when our handyman came to fix it, after about 20 minutes, was able to put it back on and came in, shook my hand and said, "Merry Christmas, that's my gift to you." That's God in action through each of us. We have the power to spread that joy, to spread that peace, to spread that love. It's that time of year when the world realizes once again that we are falling in love constantly with ourselves, with our neighbors, with our world, with God. Falling in love. What a beautiful practice. So blessing each of us for the rest of this month and into the new year, with a committed spiritual practice, with the commitment to support one another on our journey, to be aware of when some of us are celebrating and joyful and baking wedding cakes and others are perhaps grieving and mourning and having a hard time, that we are there for each other, always, just as God is there for us within each of us. What a beautiful time of year it is, my friends. Love and peace and blessings, deep peace to each and every one on the planet. And I invite you to celebrate with us on New Year's Eve morning as we meditate in peace, on peace with millions of others across the globe. I release this word now, knowing as all prayers, it is heard and it is answered right now in the mind of the divine. And so I release it, I let it go, and we say together, and so it is. Amen.